You can't see anything. You cannot come to know anything without having some perception of it. You first have to have a blueprint of it in the mind, whatever it is. A reference. Sometimes we call it idea of something. The Buddha talks about sannyas, a blueprint, a perception, a concept, a thing in the mind that you can always go back to and just compare. Okay, this experience I'm having right here, is there a precedent, like in the court system, at least in the US, there's this like, okay, is there a precedent, a case where this has been addressed, something similar, and then based on the decisions made by that, with that, then we can proceed with this one, because it's unprecedented for us. It makes things a lot more complicated, in fact, imperceptible, if there's no perception of it. It takes a while for the brain of an infant to see. The eyes are there, but the eyes are, in a sense, seeing, but the brain is not. So technically, the child is blind, initially. And then slowly, the connections are being made. The way that medicine, or even Western psychology can approach it, might in fact, in this case, sound quite mystical or metaphysical compared to how we understand it in the Dhamma. It's basic connection between nama and rupa, plain and simple. They're both there, but the connection is not strong enough. So the interlacing, the interweaving, the coming together of both allow the brain to catch up to what the, in this case, rupa, or the form, meaning the eyes, are picking up. Why? Because nama has to really go, as they say in computer language, online to catch up with the form, which is basically made out of the four elements. Four elements. Nama happens to be the mental attributes or qualities of the experience that facilitate, that allow you to connect with the world around you. Now, the problem is that we give so much credence, so much attention to perceptions, to the point where we live through our perceptions. There's a problem. Here's an experiment that anyone can do. When you look over, when you look across from you, let's say listeners, when they get this recording, when you look at them, are you really seeing them? Especially when they're speaking to you. Experiment. Call up the person, or just looking at another person as they're speaking, as you're speaking, both of you. Are you truly listening to them? Or is there a filtration system through which the words are passing? Their words especially. In other words, your communication, is it truly with them or with you? Specifically, with your own concepts, with your own perceptions of them. Now, that is on the practical side of things. That is on day-to-day communication-based evidence-based, you can say, way of looking at the role that perceptions have on us in the way we live our lives, in the way we think, and how much perceptions really dominate us. So perceptions are not necessarily things that are outside, or that they are something in the cabinet, one of the cabinets of your life, that you reach over, grab when you're using something based on, certain need. No, it's happening all the time. The moment you wake up, you're actually, most people are functioning from their perception. They are not seeing what's happening. Unless there's a scorpion that just stung them. They're just going to go ahead and carry over from where they left off the night before or yesterday. Because the scorpion comes in and throws a wrench in the machine, as it were. And all of a sudden, at least briefly, or however long the pain lasts, the jolting lasts, during that time, there will be a gap where perceptions can't invade, can't dominate your life. Basically, you're not running on automatic pilot. So perceptions do that also. They train us to become numb to life. That's why Lord Buddha was very critical of perceptions. Now, don't get me wrong, perceptions are important to a certain extent, of course. But like anything that we use, if we don't apply wisdom, it will use us. Think of a GPS system. If you're the kind of person who always relies on the GPS, Global Positioning Satellite System, of how to get from here to there, even though you know it like the back of your hand, but there are people who actually will rely on, every single time they set foot outside their door, on the Google Maps or some type of a map to guide them there, even though they know the way. Or they just want to make sure they're not caught in traffic type of, there's usually something like that. But it teaches you to just be obedient to your perceptions. Blindly following. Unfortunately, that's how most people function. Sometimes people could say, you probably have heard this, oh, it's just instinctual or second nature. Sometimes it's a misnomer. Sometimes we're misusing the terms here. They're not, they're not the same terms. They're not synonyms to each other, the way I understand them, anyhow. Now, in the practice of, meditation, in this discipline that we call Buddhism, specifically the teachings of Lord Buddha, which we get from the earliest tradition, specifically from the Pali Canon, the discourses or the suttas, as Lord Buddha taught them, we see how during the course of the training, what we call patipada, this spiritual training, if you will, one of the biggest hurdles we will have, the obstacles, will be those perceptions that we carry. Some are going to be on the grosser level, some, majority will be on the subtle. This has everything to do with our understanding of the Dhamma, with our interpretation of the Dhamma, with our, which means, by the way, when you put them together, our acceptance of the Dhamma. Acceptance, underline. Meaning, you're going to have your perception sitting there at the gate, at the entrance. And your perceptions will dictate what will go in, what will not, what will be left out. This is where perceptions can really come to dominate in such a terrible way. in ruining a person's life. Even in the training, even in the course of practice. This is where people get stuck, by the way. This is where people are unable to advance. This is when decades might pass, and a whole lifetime passes. Meanwhile, the person is, as they say, holding on to their guns. They're not moving. They're not budging. In fact, they are comfortable. They're unwilling to give it a second glance. Could it possibly be that I maybe might be mistaken in this? What could Lord Buddha or his disciple or disciples, what could they have meant by this? Yes, this is what I always thought, believed firmly, but could there be another mode of understanding this? Now we are covering now the Sammaditthi Sutta. In this tradition, in Buddhism, proper Buddhist teachings where we get historically from the Buddha, there's a mode of questioning that a person applies onto themselves and their understanding, and that is to look at the thing being asked, being discussed from different angles. Just to test, retest, triple test, and quadruple test, etc., as needed. So long as the person is alive, you owe it to yourself to question your understanding, at the very least, your understanding, in comparison to or in reference to the Dhamma which is found in the suttas. This is something that is continuously encouraged throughout, in fact, advised to be followed throughout the suttas. In one particular Nikaya, in the Anguttara Nikaya, I don't remember how many times I've come across this as I was translating the 9,000+, over 10,000 suttas. There's so many times that you see this. Now in the Majjhima Nikaya, the one that we're doing now, the Middle Length Discourse is discourse number 9 with Sammaditthi, where Venerable Sariputta is addressing his colleagues' questions to him about what constitutes a noble disciple's right view. The moment he answers it, the moment he gives a response to it by saying yes, and he explains it thoroughly, they come around and they ask him another nuanced version of the question. Wonderful friend, could there be another way of? And then this goes on. Could there be another way? After every single one of these beautiful explanations, which is very thorough, each of them. And what are they doing? This is an old mechanism to challenge and to uproot, yank it out, this thing called perception that is blocking the way. This is something that is terrible, that's occurring today, where people are cementing, concretizing their own perceptions of the Dhamma. That's why it's terrible. That's why you have very few people really growing in their practice. Even though the teaching is there, they're looking at it, but what they're picking up from it, it's just like that little infant who's looking at their mom sitting in front of them, smiling and gesturing, all these, they can't see. They can't see. They're looking, but they can't see. Until a few days later, maybe a few hours later, they're picking up some kind of movement. They can follow a hand gesture and this and that, or they snapping of a finger that the doctor does, all of a sudden they turn, but they couldn't do it a few days earlier. It is blindness to follow your perceptions. Even Nibbana, which is the goal, if that becomes simply a figment of your perceptions, good luck. because you're never going to taste it. Never, underline, underscore, never going to taste it. So long as you're holding on to your perceptions. And this is a big problem. This is what sometimes I refer to as arrogance, conceit, which I'm not the first one, obviously. Lord Buddha talks about this again and again. It's a heavy, heavy, heavy burden that we carry. And it's no one else is responsible for this other than one's self. And this actually makes me want to address another aspect. The hurdle, which earlier I was mentioning about obstacle. We are our true obstacle. Us. The person. Because of the drive to have things be a certain way. Remember the blueprint I was mentioning? What am I referring to when I say, well, it's supposed to be like this? People are shocked every time I mention how Lord Buddha was not a softie. He wasn't a pushover. He wasn't like, yes, he was very kind, generous, compassionate. Yes, all those things. But he was also alive. He was also very rational. He teaches us across the centuries about how to build and maintain your own boundaries, not to let people walk all over you, or things to walk all over you, to say no when you mean no, to say yes when you mean yes. He was also very stern. We don't have that today. And if we do, it's the domineering type of sternness, which is they missed the boat. Because I say this because I see it sometimes in monks that are very much like dictatorial. My way or the highway type of a thing. And it's like you look for the Dhamma, you can't find it because now they've become Kublai Khan. All of a sudden. And they carry themselves as if they're the gatekeepers of the Dhamma. They're not. No one is. No one is. No one can be. Why? Because the Dhamma is the Dhamma is the Dhamma. It can only be realized, tasted by the individual, unless they become their own obstacles. Now, if we don't advance in this, if we don't push through this, we're going to be stuck in a loop that doesn't take us anywhere. Fortunately, we have a middle ground. And that is the example of Lord Buddha and the Arya Savakas, his own disciples, across the centuries. What I mean by this is students would come to follow the instructions because they trust something to be there that they cannot find. They realize the role, the need for them to actually learn. Because of what you were asking. Perceptions, sannyas, what are they? They dictate your life. They run you. They run your life. You are your sannyas, basically. Now, to break free from that, to not become cemented, to yank it out, requires you to follow instructions of someone who knows this, who can explain things. Not on their, off the top of their head. No, it has to be validated by the Dhamma. Through and through. Through and through. Now, once you find a teacher like that, you have to stick to what they say. Aha, now we get to the main crux of the problem. How many people do you know who are willing to do that in this day and age? I can't even count them on my hand, a single hand with 5 fingers. In my entire years of teaching, very few will be willing to do that. Why? Because of this love relationship we have with myself. I know the Dhamma. I know what is what. I'll use some of the things that you're saying, yeah, but I will dictate. I'm the gatekeeper. I'm the citadel. I'm there. I am the wall. I'm the boundary. I'm the border keeper. Okay. You're going to be laying your bricks all the way to Lord Yama's hell realm. There goes another life. Why? Because you came across the Dhamma and you walked away from it. Why? Because you were worshipping at your own temple. Every day we take refuge, we are training our mind to become. Yes, there's obedience that's necessary. Now this is a very big word. We live at a time period when you hear the word obey, all lights just go like a Christmas tree. Everything is just... And you can understand why. Because there's a lot of characters out there who are dying to have people who obey them. And those are the people who have never actually obeyed. They never actually found anything worthwhile because they never put in the effort. They never put in the time and energy. Shortcuts. Anyone who doesn't question is a blind believer. And oddly enough, they're the ones who end up obeying. So there is an obeying part. Let's not be confused about that. When the teacher says, do this, take this technique. You have examples, many examples of bhikkhus who took the who took the meditation object given to them by their teacher, Lord Buddha, and they would go and they would run into some problems, let's say, usually stemming from their own misconceptions, because they have a time frame in mind. I was supposed to become an arahant by now, and I'm not. Aha! I know the culprit, and it is the object. It's, the 499 buddies of mine, the other bhikkhus who got the meditation technique, it seems to be working for them. Good on them, but not for me, because I need a different one. There goes the relationship between a teacher and a student. You just nullified it, canceled it out. The contract is now torn apart by you. Why? Because you refuse to follow. Following is something that people are not willing to do. So long as you don't follow, you will fail. You're going to fall on your face in this muddy terrain called samsara. And who knows when some being is going to have compassion and lift your head off of the crystallized mud particles, pull you out from your hair and shake it off, wipe it off, wash it off with their compassion. Who knows when that day will come? If it comes, by the way, anytime soon. But now the person has the opportunity to practice. So you have instances where the bhikkhus come and Lord Buddha says, no, go back. Your approach is wrong. The technique isn't at fault. Your attitude. I've had students doing that, so I thought initially, why would anyone do that? But there's this thing called sannyas. There's this thing called attachment to them. And the person says, this isn't working. Especially with metta practice. People will come back and say, well, the breath, I've done it for years. It worked. Well, it worked in what? If it worked, you would never have come and knocked on my door, by the way. If it's been working, swell. Why did you need anyone's help? Really? Why? Because these people do not ever want to tap into the heart. They're so fixated, they're so crystallized, they're calcified. Their hearts are calcified. So they have no idea of what progress really is. They do know in their mind what it should be. And that is what we're referring to again and again by sannyas. So obedience has everything to do with being open. You're not an automaton. You are exercising scrutiny, investigation of both yourself, your mind, as well as your teacher, if you have one. And if you don't have one, you can use the suttas, definitely. But guess what? Somebody's still going to be scrutinized all the time, and that is you. The one in the mirror, reflecting back at you. How many people are doing that? Willing to do that? They don't, because they're too much in love with their narcissism. They love the person in the mirror. The ideas. Peacocking. Admiring themselves. Admiring the good that they do. They keep telling themselves stories. If events, yeah, they did occur, yes, and they need to now go back into the field and do more of those deeds so that they can replay them in their mind, so that it gives them the impression that they are really on the path. All just a bunch of hogwash. Nonsense. Nonsense, ultimately. But it keeps you delighted. It gives you that oomph, that drive to go on this dead-end path of yours. But it can't be dead-end for you, because you are really gaining so much thrill out of it, delight. For that reason, Lord Buddha even put a security measure on that as well. The joy of giving, for example. Are you delighted by that? Even Nibbana. When you look at the Mula Pariyaya Sutta, the first of the Majjhima Nikaya, which I just recently finished translating, beautiful sutta. Even that, the experience of Nibbana, Lord Buddha has a security measure. The alarms go off all of a sudden. The moment the Bhikkhu realizes there's a delighting in it. You are using it as a crutch. You are leaning on it. If somebody comes and says something bad about Nibbana, you feel offended. What have you turned Nibbana into? Another sanya. And this is why people have such a hard time to really exist, to really be. And that's another word for obedience in the path, in the practice. Vulnerability. The person has to do the due diligence to go and look for the person, a teacher. But it takes hard work, which is today's culture has very hard time dealing with. And any teacher who is willing to give it to you, by the way. There's nothing that the teacher is giving you other than their example as living role models of the Dhamma. They have to manifest it, by the way. And second, the teaching has to match their character. But above all, the teaching has to be unadulterated, untempered with the Dhamma. Through and through, it has to be the Dhamma. They can use modern language, this and that, but without becoming vulgar, but without demeaning the Dhamma, always maintaining its purity, always being venerated and respectful towards it. When that is all those factors are there, you're fine. But you have to do the work. You have to do the work. If you go to the gym, you can have a membership at the gym. You can pay you can even put it on like automatic withdrawal from the bank or automatic deposit, whatever they call it, payment plan, where you're not, without even knowing, they're deducting the money from your bank. Okay, and you feel good because they keep sending you the new card at the end of the year. Meanwhile, something else is increasing. Actually, several things. One of them is, aside from your body weight, fat content, also you're becoming lazier and lazier. Now, when you say this to people, they start laughing because they know how true it is. Unless you put the time, unless you put the energy, unless you actually sweat it out, it won't come off. Everyone knows this. You can buy the best textbooks in the world. You can go and even get somehow yourself registered in some fancy schmancy university in the world. Okay, but you don't go to class. How in the world are you going to learn? You never read the textbook, you never do the exercises, you never attend classes, you never engage in conversations, in debates and all that are necessary to allow you to grow intellectually, academically. You don't do any of those things. Of course, and here too, people will say, of course you're not going to grow. If somebody gives you a diploma, it's going to be a fake diploma. Okay, if we agree on those factors, how are we not seeing the value of real hard work in this practice? Patipada means a path that needs walking, needs to be walked. Otherwise, what kind of a path is it? Of course, there's a shortcut. You don't have to make it harder than it is, and it's supposed to be. That's called the Noble Eightfold Path, middle path. One is pursuing, on one extreme you have the pursuit of pleasures, becoming intoxicated. On the other is the opposite, self-mortification. Lord Buddha had done both before becoming the Buddha. So you don't have to go ahead and reinvent the wheel, but you need to put in the work. What you have in the world today is a lot of this individuality seeking, individuality mode of functioning, steering the wheel, dominating. For that, it has become very difficult for people to attain. Because in their pursuit of that individual way of understanding, it came at a cost. Because the person is very comfortable with being me. I'm okay with me. What's in it for me? We might not say these words, but we definitely feel these emotions, experience them. And the Dhamma is all about the opposite of that. And that's another reason why people don't grow with metta. Metta is very powerful, if they do it right. Now that doesn't mean that you cannot have metta while you're doing breath meditation either. Lord Buddha was a master of both techniques. But again, it has to do with relinquishing. Patinissagga in Pali, that relinquishing is key. Because essentially what you're doing with the perception, you don't let it be just perception. We are giving it the keys to our house, the perceptions. We are giving it, as I was saying, the steering wheel. We are letting it run the show. And so long as it's doing, and the only way it can do that, I mean, you have to get, the kickback, as they say, is allowing you to maintain this image of you as someone substantial. An ego, an I. And when there's an I, there's also a you. So you see separation. That's another term for Sakkaya Ditthi. It's not a view, personality view that sometimes mistakenly it's taught. It's more than that. It has to be dynamic. You need to fuel it with your own life. and your actions. But those actions are dictated by your sannyas, by your perceptions of how things are supposed to be. Again, now we are looking at the main problem of why sannyas are there, and that is ignorance. The ignorance comes when there isn't yoniso manasikara, when the powerful lens, the magnifying lens is, which is a term for sati here, mindfulness. At the very least, it has to be mindful. The person has to be mindful, which opens the door for yoniso manasikara, which looks at, with that power of clarity, of looking, of seeing, at the root of what is going on. Meaning, it will turn on itself. Yoniso manasikara is unafraid to look at the source, specifically perceptions. And in doing so, this interaction causes the obliteration of ignorance. It completely gets rid of it. And that's why a person who has sati cannot break sila. True sati, samma sati, correct sati, right mindfulness. You cannot, if you're doing it correctly, according to the teachings of Lord Buddha, you cannot break precepts. You cannot be selfish in the negative way. You cannot be jealous. You cannot be miserly or stingy. You cannot be unwise, even. You cannot make a stupid mistake. And you definitely will be able to spot the perceptions when they show up. When you do see yourself, because you have sati, you're looking at yourself primarily. And this is when you stop being an obstacle to yourself. Now, in the midst of doing this, you need to be inspired. You need to be guided. You need to at least get some of the Dhamma rubbed off on you, as they say, by interacting with a teacher who at least will ask you some questions, because we will not see everything. When I was injured and I had lost my toes and I couldn't walk and I was teaching myself how to walk, it took me months, it took me years. But ever so often, as I would walk to my, especially walking back home from my dad's shop, he would call me after I've taken about, 10 steps. He would say, come. And he would always give me a rundown of my walk. He would give me his view. He would give me his corrective advice, which I did not like at all. Because he had no clue, he had no idea as to how hard it was for me to maintain my balance, let alone walk normal like everybody else. So a few times I listened. I was only about 8 or 9. And then he said, "Don't get mad. This is for you." And I thought, yeah, he's being a dad. Yeah, he's the adult. I'm the kid here. I'm the one who's, taken my, my liberties have been taken away from me, etc., etc. All this, PTSD, perception, sannyas kicking into gear. And I am justifying it because of my story. Until he said something. He said, "Son, when you walk, where are your eyes?" And I said, "It's in front. I'm looking where I'm going." And he says, exactly. The eyes of those who are observing you is very important. In fact, in many cases, it's more important than your eyes to correct your mistakes. And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "My eyes are looking at you. I'm looking at you from the back. You don't know how crooked your walk is. I'm giving you pointers. I'm giving you instruction as to how to tweak it. It's great that you're not falling. It's great that you don't use any crutches. Like you said, you will never. Because he had went and borrowed money and got me first the wooden crutches, the ones that you put under your armpits, the long ones. And I said, no, we can't afford it, just take it back. And then he knew that a friend of mine who was also injured the same day with me from the same injuries, the war injuries, that his mom had gone and got him those crooked, like the ones that go behind with the brace to support the elbow, and you hold it with your fists, so on both sides, so metal, aluminum or stainless steel type of crutches, which were even more expensive. So he borrowed money to get those, and I said, Dad, take them back. I'm going to teach myself how to walk. I was only 8. So he was impressed by that, but he wasn't impressed by my crooked walk now. I thought it was extremely unfair that now I have to even fix the walk according to their dictates. But then, after spending some time, I saw what the value was here of what he was offering me. I could take it or leave it, but I would regret it for the rest of my life, because my dad, at least, is my dad, and he can tell me. Others, even if they cared about me, they might not say anything. The teacher is like that. The real teacher is like that. They are the embodiments of the Brahma Viharas. Now, can the students see that? That's the problem. They will not see it, guaranteed, if they are run by their perceptions. They will not see it. Many, countless people did not see Lord Buddha, even though they saw him. They saw him coming, they saw him going. They never saw him, though. They even were many of them were in robes, they never saw him. See as in to really see the value of what's going on here. Because if you really want to break free from suffering, you need the guidance. At the very least, if you can't find a teacher, that is, physical one, to find it in Lord Buddha's example through the suttas. And it's there for those of us who are willing to open ourselves up to it. But again, perceptions come in, sannyas come in, and they ruin the day, the life for us. So, I hope this was helpful. And if it opened up some other questions popped into your head, so just tell me. Questions?
Yeah? I think it's language is detachable as if from sannyas. When we talk about sannyas, there's a story, like you were saying. There's always a story, so language. So I find that to be a helpful gauge to not get pulled into the content of the stories of the sannyas, but just see them as a contrast between the stillness of sati and the agitation, the commotion, the noise of sannyas. Sometimes, because it's so difficult to, when one is in that momentum of the story, you don't see them as sannyas. It's so powerful, but I think if we just separate, the stillness, the sati on the one hand, and the language, words.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say sannyas are inextricably tied with language? So then within it would be the solution to kind of...
You cannot function without sannyas. That also has to be said. Because they're part of earlier I was talking about nama rupa. Sannyas are part of nama. Sanya is what's allowing the baby to actually be able to see, eventually. when in Buddhism we don't have a person or a soul, like, other religions and other ways of thinking have. We have the 5 aggregates. Khandas, they're called in Pali. So, without getting into the other ones, I've talked about this extensively. But anyhow, the sanya portion, yes, it is inextricably connected to, weaved together with language. That's why language is very important. Why do you think I'm doing the translations? Because I need to correct the mistakes. The language that is used is the academic language that is so divorced from reality. It's antiquated. In fact, it never worked. That's why Pali works. But unfortunately, people don't know Pali. And what benefit is it going to be to go in and study 30, 40 years in academia to learn Pali, but not be a practitioner? So that's not the answer either. So the suttas in themselves, in Pali, they say so much, but in the English, at least the English versions, and some of the Western languages that I'm now studying to relate, to see a connection if they're there, it's the same problem. It's perpetuating the sannyas. The language that we use, is perpetuating the wrong view that the perceptions are in the business of maintaining. So we need to be careful with the language that is used, because the human brain really responds to language. And images, of course. Images first, but close second is language. And of course, images can be termed as language, right? Imagery, symbolism, that's what essentially letters were. Images, drawings, pictographs. But terms, words have become very much part of this worshipful approach to our sannyas, our perceptions. That's why people will get into fights. The commentators are known for this. They will see it as, this Dhamma, that not as Dhamma, simply because of a term not meeting their expectations. So yes, to your question. However, I think there was another kind of like a question hovering somewhere in regards to the stories. Let's say you have a story. Where is it written? Where did you read a story?
In a book.
In a book. Let's narrow it down. What's a book comprised of?
Paper and ink.
Paper and ink. Meaning a page. Right? Let's say each page has a story. Yes? It occupies space, yes? If your past has everything to do with the stories you've told yourself, who says you cannot write a new story? Empty your pages. For now, you can go ahead and empty it out, get a blank page, and write a new story. With less inhibiting sannyas. Now remember, sannyas are important because so long as you're alive as a person, as a being, you need to have the 5 aggregates. Again, they are made of rupa, vedana. Rupa is the form, vedana, sometimes called nama and rupa, but properly it would be rupa. Vedana is the feeling. Sanya are the perceptions or memories. Sankhara are the habitual drives. And then finally we have consciousnesses. There's 6 consciousnesses: the eyes, the ears, consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and mind consciousness, mental consciousness. So we don't have just a consciousness, one consciousness, no. Aside from these 6, there's none. Okay? So when we talk about sannyas and their power over us, it's not it shouldn't be a defeatist position that you're taking against the sannyas. Every time you sit to meditate, you are rewriting your story. That is, every time you are relinquishing your attachment to how things are supposed to be. This is another aspect of obeying. You're not obeying anyone ultimately, you're simply obeying the truth, that is the Dhamma. That's what you're obeying, and not your sannyas. That's another thing that happens. People who are against, like, no, we don't obey anybody. Okay, yeah, but you do obey your sannyas, my friend. Blindly. And that's why Scorpion has such a power over you when it stings you in the morning. And it severs your connection to the God that you worshipped, which is you and your perceptions. That's how flimsy it is. That's how fickle it is. That's why you are rootless. You don't have a ground to stand on. That's why when you're bowing, you're actually getting closer to the ground by touching your forehead to the ground, bowing at the altar of the Dhamma. You're saying, I have studied, I'm studying, I'm practicing, but ultimately I know nothing. But I'm open to learn. I'm open to learn. That's what you're doing. And that's such a freeing experience, because now you just emptied your page from its previous story. Grammar and vocab all mixed in there, tossed out, thrown out. Why? Because you're starting anew with every moment of sati. That you're experiencing the body for the first time. For the first time. Because my dad also helped me to stay with the body. Every single time I was bringing my awareness, I didn't know I was doing this. I was a kid. But I was becoming aware of the body. How I'm placing my right foot versus the left. How is my body, is it leaning to either side? How am I carrying my pelvis, my head, my shoulders, my arms? So it brought me to the body again and again. Every single time it was new, it was fresh. And that requires humility. Just like it required some enormous amounts of humility for me to sit there to hear my dad tell me those things. And not to walk off. And I saw the value of what he said. He was teaching me Dhamma, even though he didn't know anything about Dhamma. Hmm.